$2,000. That's where gold is headed. The growth will continue throughout 2023 with gold prices remaining elevated at an average price of $2,086 an ounce, according to Bank of America. Crypto keeps on tanking. Stocks are too volatile. Gold in your IRA is steady. Thousands of people have retired comfortably with the help of Noble Gold Investments and their gold and silver IRAs. If you get in before the end of this month, you'll bag an incredible free 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin with every qualified IRA of $20,000 or above. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold Investments. Call 877-646-5347 to find out more or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. Hey, Inspired Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, Jean Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another inspired conversation. And I think I've said this 16 or 17 times this year. Welcome back, Frank Jacob, my soul brother, amazing researcher, and man, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Hi, John. Always great to be back with you. It's been a little while now, and I was really looking forward to our next conversation.
Yes, same here. And I'm pretty sure this marks the last conversation for 2022. I just want to say, Frank, amazingly enough, the way we were brought together, it was all very synchronistic. The universe did its thing, and here we are for our 16th or 17th conversation. And so far over 3 million people have watched our conversations, which is quite amazing, actually, and we're very thankful for it. And today we want to dive into something that very much is in addition to what we've been talking about for so long. The theme has really been the two timelines, the dystopian artificial transhumanist timeline that's being pushed in the mainstream. And then the second timeline is our natural organic human timeline that very much is in sync with the divine creator and in sync with our true destiny. Today, we talk about a third and hidden timeline that you could call it a crutch, you could call it a gateway. Give us a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today and what you're willing and ready to share.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Awesome about the 3 million people, that's for sure. And I'm so glad because I think it's really important for us to counter a lot of the disinfo stuff that's going out there. So, so what we're going to talk about today, I like how you phrased it, the hidden timeline. You could say that there was about 100 years ago, there was a timeline that took root, and it quickly, again, it was stamped out because the powers that be realized that if this were to surface and gain wide publicity, it would be over or for them already then. So we're going to be a little bit politically incorrect today. In terms of we're going to be talking, we're going to be talking about some of the sacred cows of the, technology and information that are out there that have kind of gaslit us, because you wonder, like, why are all these so-called geniuses in the world, and what have they produced for us, right? So what this timeline, took a split because there was a time when. At a point where there was people that were actually incredible, brilliant people, geniuses that were so smart. They were the kind of caliber of people, John, that would, like, if, they needed some kind of a new optical device and the optics didn't exist, they'd, figure out how to machine their own parts and they would build them, So I'd like us to talk about 4 inventors that have that are part of that hidden timeline. Obviously, Nikola Tesla, that's one that a lot of people know. But what people know a little less about is one of his last student, Otis T. Carr. He took what Nikola Tesla wasn't able to complete in his time. And he even used those words. He said, in my time, I couldn't get them to accept this. You take this. I'm going to give you everything I know. And you take it and put it out in your time. Maybe you'll have better luck. Then another inventor along, because what these guys are talking about with Nikola and with Otis T. Carr had to do with a form of energy that was not nuclear. And it was not any kind of hocus pocus. It was real. It had to do with magnetism, the kind of stuff that holds our bodies together. And another person who had at the time invented something in the middle of last century was a German guy called Friedrich Lölling. That's the third guy I want us to explore a little bit. And finally, those are the technical aspects that have to do with energy, free energy devices, and that would have revolutionized and changed our entire society. The whole structure of society would have been different if these guys would have surfaced and prevailed. But as we'll see, and I'll show you guys that, why they didn't prevail. We have to go into that. We have to understand sort of the perspective as to what was blocking it. And finally, we're going to get into some of the health sector. There was a guy called Royal Raymond Rife, who 100 years ago, another genius in his time, way ahead of his time, who actually was the first person to photograph and see nano-sized living organisms. And he actually developed his own technology to be able to see living things in real time and find out, as a result of watching these pathogens on a microscope that he built, he was able to figure out how to get rid of them using frequencies. Amazing, amazing stuff. So, with that said, I think that's going to get a lot of people very excited. And these are all things that I believe, even though they went under 100 years ago, that one of the big themes that we've been talking about a lot is truth and the truth. You can't keep the truth down forever. And a lot of people will come in and say, well, truth is relative. And, one person's truth is another's lie and blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about that kind of truth. I'm talking about real truth, like things that are real. Like, this is real. This technology is real. This stuff is not just someone's perspective and a different philosophical idea. No, this is actual real stuff, real truthful, like truth in the sense that the inventors were given the gift by the creator to tune in and see it clearly, like Nikola Tesla would, and then, just channel it through. And that truth, unfortunately was stamped out, but you can't stamp it out forever. And I think we're having in our world right now, we're experiencing an unprecedented, frantic, almost, I would say, effort of paranoid, desperation to stamp out whatever they can in terms of information. All this information is surfacing. Like, I found some headlines here. This is stuff that's going on right now. The government has funded research into correcting false beliefs. If you can believe that. I mean, can you imagine your government has decided to, hey, what you don't believe, John, isn't quite right. So we're going to actually fund some research into fixing the stuff that you think is true, but it isn't true, right? It's like, this stuff, you can't invent this stuff, right? The American conservative is talking about, how basically they're going to be, the Department of Homeland Security is going to be funding and working together with social media companies to police misinformation and disinformation, because this is what they're worried about. They're worried about the truth. That for them, you have to sort of realize that their word for misinformation is code for the truth. Okay, now there are a lot of disinfo agents out there, right? We have to, be aware of them. But I think we can.
It's not really working, Frank. It's not really working. And this is the handbook for this is 1984. I mean, you go read it. This is the handbook, and they're not very original. They're literally just using those tools that they developed a long time ago. They're just using technology in a more sophisticated way, but it's not working. The truth is so powerful that it supersedes all technologies. It supersedes this. And now there's a momentum for this truth. I call it the manifestation of truth. That's our timeline right now. And what I wanted to say is, before we dive into these technologies, we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg here today. There's many, 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 many more. But
yes.
you took significant inventions from each field that could have changed how the 20th century has played out, and will, I believe, change how the 21st century will play out. And the second thing is, and this is something as a baseline here, if you look at these inventors, how they lived, how they spoke, what they believed, and how they put out information, it was all based on the eternal harmony of the universe. It was all based on balance and natural harmony. And that's in stark contrast to the tech giants that we see today. And all you have to do is look at the headquarters. How do their buildings look? There is no geometry. There's no sacred geometry. There's no beauty. There's no harmony. It's all out of whack. And so that's kind of we can take this again as the contrast moving into this conversation. This technology is based on harmony. Hence, it was fought so hard by the forces that want everything but harmony. Is that kind of how we can move into it?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Really, it is like it is in tune with the natural forces of our real world. And it's not part of, a simulation or anything. And as opposed to that whole movement that is, that we're up against, which is artificiality. And, these the laws that are working here are different from the laws that are that they're working with. And this is kind of like that timeline war. And the way they keep us down is because we let them, right? We do this, right? You know, this is basically what people do when they're confronted with cognitive dissonance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're basically, they don't want to look at things because they know if they look at things, it's basically gonna mean they're gonna have to rearrange their world picture, right? So, I mean, that's why it's almost like, that's why I call it like a global gaslighting. They've basically gaslit us into believing that certain people, like for example, Einstein, and we're going to talk about him a little bit. He was the smartest man in the world. He was the man of the century, person of the century on Time magazine. And, you know, so after World War II, we moved away from these engineering and practical inventions with the laws of nature into the theoretical sciences. The timeline went into the direction of mathematical geeks that would work on stuff and put stuff on a blackboard that nobody understood except them.
And which was the purpose.
Right. And it's like, okay, you ask yourself, you know, what did these people actually produce? You know, and that's what I started to look at recently. I'm like, wait a minute, like, what really did these people come up with that has really changed and revolutionized our world, right? So, I mean, let's look at Nikola Tesla, okay? First of all, Nikola Tesla, I'm going to put this up so you see this. This is important to know. Basically, Nikola Tesla was not a mathematician like Einstein. And he was and it's funny because when I started to get into Tesla, I think it was back in the 1980s, very little people even knew of this guy. I mean, people would always know Edison, but they didn't know Tesla. But Tesla in 1882 discovered the rotating magnetic field, a fundamental principle in physics and one of the greatest discoveries of all time. Yeah, in 1887, he registered his patent for electric magnetic motors and turned into 40 patents, which were then bought by George Westinghouse a year later. Okay, figure this guy's doing patents, like 40 patents in a year. Can you imagine what kind of brain power these people had, right? Before they were, you know, all this pollution they were going through, right? And his ideas basically turned Niagara Falls into a power plant that was the wonder of the world. He invented electricity, okay? I mean, Tesla is, you know, invented electricity. He took it a lot further. He didn't stop there. He figured out how to take high voltage electrical energy and created this thing called the Tesla coil, which is in every television and radio produced ever since, right? And he basically figured out the next crazy thing is remote control via radio. In 1898, he had a patent for controlling a boat remotely, and that was the forefather of robotics and satellite communications and anything. And basically, I mean, these are the kind of things that were like, you know, they're only now are we really starting to use this stuff. This is the kind of stuff that has changed our society, right? 700 patents were issued to the guy. 700. All right. I mean,
the difference is, Frank, if I may just jump in, they took these patents, they hid them long enough from the world to extract it in a way and put it out in society so they could monetize it. And they could limit the real capabilities of these technologies so they could control them. Where Tesla was known as someone who wanted this to be free to the people as a liberation, from a slave system he knew existed back then.
Exactly. And the thing is, and this is actually a key point, because another thing I want to show you guys is this, because basically his next thing was, you know, he dealt with ether physics. He didn't deal with this Big Bang stuff. And he'd figured out a whole other way of measuring and quantifying things, cause and reaction, based on an ether. And this has been ignored by the Einstein crowd, right? So essentially, because of his inventing so many things, nobody bought this stuff because they wouldn't buy it. He was broke all the time and he had all these leftover patents, right? Like he said, we should, before he, you know, in the 20s, when he was really broke, you know, and he needed money, he was trying to get the US government to basically buy some of his spin-off technology. And he said, we should push the development of flying machines and wireless transmission of energy without an instant's delay. And with all the power and resource of the nation, the immediate association here is between flying machines, not airplanes, by the way, and wireless technology, wireless transmission of energy, right? Tesla had piles of patents which produced him no money because the Morgans and the Rockefellers, those names that keep coming up, had declared them off limits. No one could borrow money from the banks to put it onto one of these systems and to put one of these systems into practice. And anyone who was foolish enough to do their own money investment in it could expect the wrath of the gods to come down on them like the lightning bolts from Zeus. Okay? Right? So you had this guy, look at this stuff, right? This is the stuff that was around in 1901. Yeah, I mean, like, it's hard to kind of wrap your brains around what this guy actually was up to here, right? I mean, and here, like, he had this idea, like, his reasoning was very logical, practical. He's like, look, we have this huge Earth, and he proved that wireless transmission of information, radio signals, happened through the Earth, not over ground. And even though people today still believe that wireless travels over the surface, if you take the grounding away from any satellite or any transmission station, it's over. There's no more signal. This proves, and he showed it with his diagrams. These are some of the diagrams that you can see that he showed. Basically, if you pound, like he has the needle up on this side here, if you push the hand pump on the Earth, then you're going to get an equal amount of pressure on all parts of the surface, no matter where it comes up. I mean, it's kind of genius what he was thinking about, right? So, and he was working on talking with other planets. He was figuring out how to communicate because he understood things from a different level with the ether and whatnot. He actually figured out that, how to communicate with other planets. And there's information. We have it in our film Packing for Mars, where there's a telegram he sent at Christmas in 1901, I believe, where he said, we've made contact. He's received signals from other worlds. Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty sad that he essentially went under because of essentially the next guy who came along, who literally became this guy I was telling you about, the man of the century, is this guy, essentially the cult of Einstein is what I call it.
Again, in contrast, I think Einstein was a team player for team cabal. And yeah. So he's this figure that was enshrined into history, like you said, as the brain of the century. Right. And Tesla, Tesla really needed the help of the common people over the last years and decades in the internet to really make a comeback. Because as JP Morgan said, if I can't put a meter on it, I don't care for it. And so Einstein played the game, right?
Well, he was a man who essentially was, you could say, propped up, and he was like a media whore. I mean, he's like, you can see him here in the middle. He's just surrounded. He loved nothing more than a bunch of driveling, drooling journalists who knew nothing, who would, just take his every word and write it down as the gospel. I mean, they put him on stamps. He became, the person of the century on Time magazine. But hey, did he invent electricity? No, actually, Tesla invented that. Did he invent wireless electricity? Maybe build on it? No, he didn't do that either, right? How about wireless communication? Did he invent that? No, he didn't invent that. Was Tesla. What about radio communication? Just simple radio? No, that was Marconi and Tesla. What about an alternative energy source like magnetic power or nuclear fusion or something like that? No, he didn't invent any of that either. But he did invent one thing. You might not know this. He invented a refrigerator.
He did.
He invented the Einstein refrigerator. Yeah. He invented a bunch of theoretical study formulas, and he didn't even invent the theory of relativity, which is funny because he actually plagiarized it. He basically took Lorentz's work and a bunch of other physicists at the time, and he reinterpreted them, with the help of his wife Mileva. Actually, she was the real brains, and he essentially, he took this stuff. He didn't attribute any credit to any of these people, which was the biggest beef they had. But when anyone ever said anything about him, any criticism that came his way, there was a word that was invented for those people, what they dealt with. It was called the Einstein terror. If you said one word about this glorious, wonderful human of a being, you were essentially anti-Semitic, you were anti-science, and they use the same clubs that they use in our modern version of the world. Anytime someone comes forward and starts talking about elitists or bankers, they always pull the same cards out, right?
That reminds me of Dr. Fauci. I am science. If you criticize me, you criticize science.
Right, exactly. You're catching on. This is what it's about, right? So, but our friend Tesla had a few words to say about Einstein. He said, Einstein is a beggar dressed in purple clothes and made king using dazzling mathematics that obscure truth. The theory of relativity is a mass of error and deceptive ideas violently opposed to the teachings of great men of science of the past and even to common sense. The theory wraps all these errors and fallacies and clothes them in magnificent mathematical garb, which fascinates, dazzles, and makes people blind to the underlying errors. Not a single one of the relativity propositions has ever been proved. So, it's bizarre, right? Nothing has been proved that this guy has said. It's all theory.
That's the way, I'm of Slavian or Slavic descent. So that's also the way of very direct, call it like it is. And he basically, in beautiful language, he said, it's complete bullshit. I call BS on Einstein, right?
It's BS. He basically called it BS. And the whole idea that, Einstein was this incredible brain that had to flee the bad Nazis, right? Because they were going to, kill him or whatever. I mean, that's totally distorted. Einstein was a communist, okay? Let's not put any doubt on this whatsoever. Einstein, he was listed in the Stalin's Pravda newspaper as one of the top 10 friends of the Soviet Union, right? He was the founding member of Die Rote Front. It's the German newspaper that was basically a communist international front paper, posing as a humanitarian, project, which, you could almost relate it to Black Lives Matter. And he fled not because, he was Jewish or because he was, being hounded. He fled because he was communist. And the communists at that time were hated like the pest. The Marxist communist movement they were trying to get rid of it. I mean, we should continue to still try to get rid of it. And it was no different back then. It was a main problem. And as a result of that, he became a Germany hater. And he even, everyone says, oh, he was this great mind and this peaceful man. He was not a peaceful man, people. Get that out of your mind. We're debunking this for once and for all. He was a warmonger, and he even told Roosevelt to develop an A-bomb to destroy the German people before the war broke out in 1939. Okay, well, let's set the record straight here.
Let's be honest here. This myth that was, perpetuated in the media and in pop culture that he participated as a significant member of the Manhattan Project and then later regretted doing it. Excuse me, but if you are a genius, and if you are the man of the century and the scientific mind of, this whole era, well, then you probably know what you're working on when you're working on a freaking nuclear bomb that has the capacity for mass destruction. So yeah. I never bought that story because either you're really smart or you're really stupid. You can't be both at the same time.
No, right, exactly. And his, hatred, I mean, he was trying to get FDR to develop the bomb. And he wrote in a letter, which you can see on the right there on the bottom. You can't read it, obviously, but this letter does exist. I'm actually quoting real facts here. I always try to have my sources. That he said basically the Germans can be killed or constrained after the war, but they cannot be re-educated to a demonic way of out of their demonic way of thinking and acting. It is hoped that by war's end they will largely have been killed off. Yeah, she wrote that to FDR. I mean, okay.
And we're talking about he's not speaking about just the regime. He's speaking about the whole population, right?
The whole population of Germany, because all Germans were bad, right? All Germans were bad, right? And in the end, what kind of a man was he really? Well, something surfaced in 1996, actually in the New York Times of all places. that talked about the dark side of Einstein, a short moment where something, every now and then they publish something that comes out and it's like a little bit of truth nuggets, but he was abusive to his wife. I mean, he not only did he screw around on her and have multiple mistresses, he had no respect for her whatsoever, even though she was the one, literally, you could say, responsible for him winning the Nobel Peace Prize. But he actually wrote this to her. He said, at some point, he said to her, she was the mother of his two sons, right? He laid down a series of conditions under which he would agree to continue their marriage. He wrote, "You will see to it that 1, my clothes and linen are kept in order. 2, that I am served 3 regular meals a day in my room. And you will renounce all personal relationships with me except when these are required to keep up social appearances. And you will expect no affection from me. You must leave my bedroom or study at once without protesting when I ask you to." Okay, this is the kind of chauvinist pig that he really was.
Charmer,
okay, so,
really charmer. Wow. I mean,
I'm sorry, I'm bumming you out here. Maybe you had such a high regard of him. But
no. I listen, when unfortunately, and this might be also a little, prejudice, but when I see someone on Time magazine on the cover being praised, I automatically assume the opposite. And if someone is being vilified on the Time magazine cover, I look at that person a little close and see maybe they were getting too close to the mainstream and trying to destroy it maybe, or have a different narrative. So no illusions here, but it is interesting. It is interesting for me to see how it was possible to create a narrative around so much hot air. I mean, that's, and if you think about it, I mean, if people think about one physicist, especially those who were educated in the 20th century, or one scientist, one person, it's always Einstein. In the movies, in pop culture, everywhere, T-shirts, books, everything. And that tells you something. To me, that's the distraction. And that's why I'm so excited that we're focusing on some of the real stuff that could have and will help humanity on this weird hidden timeline.
Well, after Einstein finally left the stage, we had to, of course, deal with another one of them. And that was this guy. The cult of Stephen Hawking came along right after, right? What was he? Another theoretical mathematician. And, I list a few things that he came up with here that he basically expanded on, right? The Big Bang Theory, the origins. Like, I look at the Big Bang Theory, I always laugh because it's very masculine. It's a very male thing, right? The Big Bang, it's kind of like, it kind of equates to me to ejaculation, bang, and the universe happens and it spreads out there. It's a very, very male thing. But in the end, after all of the hot air with him too, what did you end up with? No inventions, nada, nothing. Okay. What did he bring to us? Really nothing. In fact, it's funny, when I did some research on him, it turns out there's even people that believe he was replaced by a lookalike many, many years ago. That essentially the Hawking that has been pushed out there in the public is not even the real Hawking. And this article here talks about all these different reasons why. There's all these, facts surrounding it, that he not only does he not look the same anymore, like his physique has changed, the shape of his head, his teeth have changed, his ears have changed. These are all telltale signs that a person this isn't the same person any longer. But again, we have this guy who is a cash cow for the elite to keep us gaslit with all these theories of the universe and theories of aliens. And, of course, he's an atheist, right? And he's basically making scared predictions that send panic into people about the extraterrestrial reality. They're going to come here and they're going to wipe us out. These are all the things that Hawking gave to us, right? And then, so I think that Tesla summarizes it very nicely when he says, essentially, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. The scientists of today think deeply instead of clearly. One must be sane to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane.
Ain't that the truth? And we can, these heroes of the Matrix, these heroes of the simulation, we can look at something very practical to point out the evidence. So while people say we are highly sophisticated technologically today, the main means that we use technologically are still based on inventions from over 100 years ago. Nothing has changed in our transportation of electricity or even the production much, really, to be honest. We still use combustion engines to fly around using incredible amounts of resources, and we still pollute the earth, and all because that's what you can put a meter on, and that's the basic fundamental thread that goes through this. You put a meter on electricity, you put a meter on gas and oil and all these things, and that satisfies the control system, right?
That's it.
That's how the matrix operates.
Right, because they keep us, slaving to maintain our rent and maintain our energy bills and keep paying the taxes. And, it's just this whole system is centered around keeping us distracted and keeping us from not being creative. And these people that we're showing now, these are people that are the creatives, that had the genius minds that every one of us really could have if we were unburdened from all the things that are keeping us down, that are unnatural. Really, it's this unnatural is the key. The natural and unnatural are the key words that divide these two timeline concepts that we're shooting for. And when people talk about the new timeline, one of the main things they always talk about is abundance for all. No more, even money. Some people would say that isn't no longer even needed. Yeah. And, I don't know how that'll work personally. I think there still needs to be some kind of means of exchange, but it certainly doesn't have to be digital programmable currency, but let's dig into a little bit of the technology that existed 100 years ago.
Let's do it.
Which was working. Okay. And what I've done is when I did the research for our talk today, I found some films and some old clips that many people maybe don't even know exist. And I try to cut them down to a couple of short clips, just summarizing what these people do. So let's start with Otis T. Carr. Are you on board?
Absolutely. Let's go.
It sounds like this technology is something that we have to be spiritually advanced enough to be able to use it. And Carr explained that as higher consciousness. He said, you've got to raise the consciousness. When you were operating this disc, did you notice or were you told that anything changed as far as the structure of the craft? There's a consistent expansion and contraction. It's almost so instantaneous that it's unnoticeable. And in one of the smaller demonstrations, we had a small model, aluminum model, and I could hear this hum, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful feeling while this thing was running, and I was touching it, and then it got more and more intense, and then I found like it was Jello, and I could put my fingers on it like Jello on it. I looked at the other guys, and then I put my fingers inside this aluminum with my hand. I said, this is impossible, but I'm doing this, and I put it in and out of the craft. And Carr was over there because he said, you're energy, and that's energy. And when you understand that, and you get a harmonic with energy, you get a balance. You can do anything. There's no limit. We fired this one up, and we were all watching it, and I was getting ready to put my hand in it, and the whole thing disappeared right in front of it. He said it's quite simple. Tesla did this all the time in his laboratory, and it's teleported, and it's out of our dimension. And he explained that the mind, when you tune yourself high enough and you get into the mind space instead of the brain space, instead of logic or instead of reasoning or instead of all those things, you just get up to a sense of knowing. You know who and what you are, that you're a creative, immortal, infinite being, and we all are. And he said everybody on this planet are gods by comparison, and they don't know it. They're asleep. And until they wake up, this is what our job is. We're making these toys, trying to get them to wake up, to realize there's no limits to what they can do. They don't have to live in servitude. They don't have to live in poverty. They've just been told that by people that unfortunately want to control things. Carr explained to us that the brain that we have operates this water vessel, which we live in. But the energy that inhabits the vessel is who and what we are. We are energy. We're not bodies. The energy is all magnetic in nature. It's free in nature. We're swimming in energy. Well, before we could get any further with it, we were invaded, if you will, by people with a piece of paper that said they were at this time closing us down. Paper read that we were attempting to overthrow the monetary system of the United States, and that could be construed as high treason, and we're shutting you down and confiscating all your equipment.
Wait a minute.
Bizarre, right?
Well, but mainly beautiful, and
Beautiful.
it is so reminiscent of personal experiences that I've had, and Kristina and I've had back in a day when we were connected with a bunch of inventors and scientists that were working on free energy devices, if you will. I mean, for the lack of a more precise term. And the story was always the same, right? If there was a small group of very conscious, peaceful, harmonious people in a room, they could make it work. As soon as they brought in money people or investors or, disturbing energies, the devices don't work. And this just absolutely confirmed that once again, how beautifully he said it. It requires a higher consciousness, right?
Right.
And
Well,
it's so important to understand that technology, this kind of technology, is directly connected to our awareness and consciousness.
Exactly. That's exactly perfectly summarized. And the man talking there was Ralph Ring. He was his main engineering assistant because obviously Otis T. Carr is no longer with us. Ralph Ring was still alive up until a very few years ago. Maybe, I think he died maybe 5 years ago. And, we knew him and his wife, Marcia, and they're just such sweet people. And
what a beautiful spirit.
Right. He is such a beautiful spirit, and he's just so innocent. He has that innocence of that era, before the corruption, before all this craziness that we're surrounded and immersed in right now. He still has that true spirit of like a child. And I love how he says it, that essentially it requires really by extension society to have this higher level of consciousness. So when we talk about moving into that new timeline, which is that quantum evolutionary leap that we have yet to realize as natural biological human beings, these are the kind of things that we can be expecting coming out on the other end of the tunnel. Those are the kind of inventions. And I do believe that they actually will not surface until literally we actually make it safe for these ideas out there to come out and to be put out there. And, the fact that the MIB, which is what he was describing, came and basically, said, this is it. You guys are a threat to the monetary system of the United States. I mean, it's like in no small words saying the banksters do not want you to be out there because, your devices.
But they also realize the significance, because to say this, they said the biggest threat to this system is to overthrow the monetary system. Yes. And they said, basically, if this were to come out, that's what it would do by default.
That's right. And they would be tried for treason. Can you believe this? Right. It's just so, and some of the pictures you saw in there were just really, I kind of cut in like that. You saw that crystal ball like thing, then the green and the orange. Yeah. I mean, the way, we don't have time for it, but when you dig into his technology, you realize that the whole navigational part was based on consciousness. And when I looked at those pictures again, it just threw me right back to what have we been talking about this summer? Project Looking Glass. And the Looking Glass had what? It had these spiraling, rings that were going around it. And the Looking Glass technology came from the J-rods, which are future humans. So it almost looks exactly like the same technology being used. And so Ralph, but check out what Ralph says about he was never going to give up on people. He kept trying, where Otis T. Carr at some point got tired of every time he would set up a new lab and create a new prototype and launch the prototype. Within hours, these MIBs would show up. It's like they can sense it almost. And they came and shut him down. And he got so tired, he said, forget it, I'm done. And Ralph kept trying. He even went to the university. So listen to what he says when he went to a university in California that was working on trying to develop and crack the problem of levitation. This is very, very cool.
We found that you can use magnetics energy much more efficiently. It's free and abundant everywhere. It has no pollution, no expiration. You can magnetism goes on forever. We're all built with magnetism. We have a shield around us holding our bodies together with magnetic field. And we want to, I would like to work with you and help you use magnetism for your levitation and propulsion system. And he said, I'm sorry, but we can't do that. And I asked him why. He says, because I'm on a government grant. The government hired me through the university to keep things like we're trying to get there. And I say, well, you're always going to try with that method because you'll never get any more than 12 or 10 feet off the ground. And he said, well, we're paid to keep trying. And if we go, thank you.
Yeah, they're paid to keep trying.
It's a lot like the farmers that are paid to not work their land and not raise cattle or anything. It's the idiotic and upside down approach that we've almost come to expect. But what a beautiful spirit. And I wanted to touch on something he said in the previous clip when he was a little younger in that previous clip. He said, basically, and I don't know if I'm paraphrasing, but he said, ultimately, we don't need these technologies. They are a stepping stone to realizing we have it all.
Yes.
We don't actually need a craft to travel. We don't actually need a device to communicate. We have it all, right? So these inventions and these devices, I think, were like memory stones for us. Like, okay, if we use this for a little while, maybe we can realize, oh, it's all internal. We
don't need it. We don't need them at all. Yeah, and I love how he calls them toys. We build these toys so that we can show people, what they're really capable of doing. And I remember when I was in the very early days of when I was sort of discovering UFOs, and I was also reading consciousness books like Seth Material and Jane Roberts and Carlos Castaneda. And I mean, I certainly, if you think it through, you realize, if this is all true about consciousness, do we even really need ships to travel? Right. And then you hear about those supposed beings that just manifest or materialize. Angels appear, these are probably higher versions or more sophisticated or like evolved versions of us that have scrapped long time ago the need to even use ships or any kind of things to travel or to get around. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And in that still, that's why I said I call it the hidden timeline, the third option. It's because it's like a bridge. It's a bridge from those who've been so manipulated into believing they're powerless. Take that bridge over to I am powerful. I am really a divinely created being. And this third hidden timeline could be a wonderful bridge when we realize, we can use these technologies for a while. So we relearn who we really are.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly the direction I think we're going. And I think so. And so it's like these technologies are really, you could see them as interim technologies until, the rest catch up. I think the whole idea of all of us simultaneously evolving to the same place may not be realistic. And it may not even be realistic that we're all going to make it. But I think it's realistic to help people along using these kinds of technologies that they seem like magic imagine 100 years ago. But I mean, they seem like magic, but they are just simply utilizing, the people that have invented them are utilizing the forces of nature. Like he says, magnetism. And so the next guy I want to show us a quick clip about, his name is a German guy. He's called Friedrich Lülling. And, he also had discovered magnetism and how magnetism worked, and he converted it into a motor. So are you ready for this?
Yes, sir.
I put subtitles for you English people.
Damn, same story almost 100 years ago now. Think about it, 1950s, and he's saying this. I mean, just think about it. How many people have come even after him, before him, of course, and said, hey, we could have saved so much pollution and the earth from so much pollution. Just imagine what's possible. Unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable. And the way he says, like, nonchalantly, yes, you start the thing up and it'll run on one set of magnets, it'll run for 10 to 20 years, And I mean, he had plans for building them into motors, into cars and in production line. And of course, we never saw that car come out. And yet, what do we get? We get the Greta Thunbergs of the world throwing guilt trips in our face that we're carbon polluters. So people just realize how much you've been gaslit, right?
She's been successfully brainwashed, that poor girl.
Absolutely, that girl's been a mind control slave. I mean, we all know that mind control slaves are part of that elite group. And some like Kathy O'Brien have, are used in that way, and others like Greta Thunberg are used in that way. And they've used them all the time. They've used them all throughout history, or at least modern, let's say the last 100 years of modern history, because they were trying to mainly avoid, in the case of Kathy O'Brien, using telegrams and telecommunications where they could be caught, with this information. But I think it shows you the measure to which we have been misguided or deluded in terms of what is real and what isn't real. What we're trying to show here on this show today is nothing other than truth and reality. And in everything else that you've been told and taught in the universities and schools think about this, 5 or more generations is a complete lie, because society would have structured itself completely different if any one of these inventions would have made its way to the common man, right? That like Otis B. Carr or Ralph Ring just told us, the banking cartel would be gone. There would be no banking cartel.
Because there would be no need for it.
There'd be no need for it. The banking cartel is tied to the oil industry, which is tied to the fake idea of fossil fuels, which is a word that Rockefeller had added to the idea of oil to make it seem like it's rare, so they could jack the price even higher. It has nothing to do with reality.
And that's why people get upset when I say, like, I don't jump on the electric car bandwagon, because it still doesn't utilize all these amazing technologies. And I can't even throw it in the face of the makers, because I know even the big companies, GM or whoever, or Ford or whatever they're building now, and I've been talking about Tesla, the big classic car makers that are going into electric, even they know that if they came out with a magnetic motor, they're not too big to be shut down, and they would be shut down, and there would be consequences.
Yeah.
So, oftentimes they're seen as the big enemy, but I know this is so big. This goes way above a GM or a Ford, even at their size. It will require us, the people, learning enough about these technologies and raising our consciousness high enough that we won't allow for this other crap to dominate us.
Exactly. It's up to us. What you're saying is that it's really up to us. And this is what I've always believed. It's like, when are we going to stop and say, wait a minute, this is just, I don't believe it anymore. The emperor has no clothes, and I'm just not going to go along with that narrative any longer. Why, why do we have to hear about hydrogen cars and, which are like highway Hindenburgs, and like, and that we need batteries in electric cars, which are, which need lithium and all that. We don't need any of that at all, John. It's just completely fabricated, complete fabrication. And, this applies, of course, and this is the next thing I want to show and share, is that it goes to the field of health as well. We are right now in the midst of you could say, a kind of a war on those who believe in natural healing versus those who believe that we have, vaccine-dependent immunity. So, I mean, it's clear from the media out there, the mainstream at least, that there are plans that they are not letting go of the narrative, which they've been talking about for the last 2 years. They're just, maybe giving it a bit of a reprise, and they're testing the waters again to see what next thing is out there. But the very notion of where all of this dis-ease, which is another way to break that word up, comes from, could have been solved a long, long time ago. And again, it comes, back to that same famous family, the Rockefellers. And we talked about that with the Barbara Marx Hubbard episode that got us into so much trouble. But again, the pharmaceutical corporations are funded, and you can look this up. You can just do your own research, but you'll see that all of the seed funding and all of the university protocols were actually devised by those who funded the universities in the 20th century, at the end of the 19th and the start of the 20th century, when modern universities popped up all over the United States. They had a curriculum, and guess who funded the universities? They were funded by the people who had so much money they didn't know what to do with it, and they figured out a great way to kind of infuse their products into the mentality of those who went through the educational system. So they taught, of course, Rockefeller was on the board of the major universities. So what did they teach there? They taught pharmacology. They didn't teach
petroleum-based pharmacology. Petroleum-based.
Exactly. Exactly.
And make no mistake, John D. Rockefeller himself was a homeopath. That's what he used. He used natural remedies. As a matter of fact, on his deathbed was a homeopath. It wasn't an MD that used pharmaceuticals that we now know as the norm. And this was something that people don't understand. This is so young. It's 150 years, maybe 140 years, where this established system was really pushed through. But the vast majority of our history is natural remedies, is homeopathy, is stuff like, the Eastern medicine that we know from various cultures. It's definitely not pharmacology.
Right. And you know how long those things you're mentioning have developed, right? Since really the beginning of mankind. And
nature is your medicine.
Those, plant medicines and those, all those methods that you were describing, they were developed a lot, further back than all this whole allopathic university-based pharmacological thinking has only really been around for 100 years. It's like a blip on the world map of time, a blip, and so you have this, and, it's basically, but still that little blip is very, very significant in terms of what kind of damage it has done. It's almost like, this parasite landed on the planet and it just, spread like to an unsuspecting population. At the time that these things took root, people were a lot more innocent. I mean, it's like when you go out in the country in Germany, in Bavaria, where I'm living, for example, and you visit some guest house and their women are wearing dirndls and the men are wearing lederhosen, and you sense right away in their mannerisms that they're much more humble and shy, and they have a very, very down to earth perspective on the world, very respectful. It's not like when you go to Starbucks in Los Angeles, where everyone's got an attitude. And, they all think they're great. They all think there's something and that the world owes them something, but the world owes you nothing. And those people are, they should start. And this is what's required. Unfortunately, it's required for the majority of people to begin questioning their attitude. Like we're showing here today, that what we've been taught about technology and the state of the world is a complete fabrication and lie. Each and every citizen out there in the world should be asking, how many other lies and things have I accepted, and how many am I using to build up my ego and think that I'm somehow important or a valuable person in the world, when in fact all I might be doing is contributing more garbage and more useless thoughts and more waste product into the world, right?
Oh my God, you just went on a rant and hit every nail on the head, my friend. Exactly, that's what it is. And the entitlement society, especially in the cities, in the urban areas where people have been detached from any sense of reality, humbleness, real connection, nature, authenticity, all that. That is so true. And they've exponentially gone more mad in their false beliefs. And I second that. And it's not just in Bavaria, which is, by the way, beautiful. It's almost like Bavaria should have belonged to Austria. It's much more similar to Austria, but it doesn't matter. But it's the same in the rural areas when we travel through the United States and we go into smaller places. People are humble, they're kind, and they're real. And a lot of times you can have a much deeper and a much more authentic conversation there than you can have anywhere else. And that's also what strikes me as so, it's actually a beautiful thing when I look at these inventors that you're presenting to us today. What do you feel, what you sense is this, it's like, it's humble, it's down to earth. They weren't in it to boost their egos. These were people that were real connected. They had a divine connection. They had that spiritual foundation. And that's what you feel. You feel it you even feel it just hearing about their inventions. It's just something very different.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different mindset that existed back then, which we've somehow lost a little bit in this over prioritization of all these so-called important fictional inventions which we're surrounded by. And this next final guy that I want us to look at, his name is Royal Raymond Rife, and he was an absolute genius. I mean, he was the kind of guy that, like I was already saying, if he was missing some parts for something he was seeing in his mind, something he wanted to invent, he would figure out how to run a machine shop and tool and die and make the parts that he was missing, because nobody else could see them the way he did and craft them the way he did. And the way I found him was, at the time in my life, at that chapter, I was working with Ann Wigmore and natural foods and healing through foods and stuff. And I came across a book in her library called The book is called The Cancer Cure That Worked, 50 Years of Suppression. Right. So, and the big topic these days still is the big C, as we like to call it, without giving it any power, because again, it isn't something which needs to have as much power as it has become or has reached in our society, because so many people, women and children and all kinds of people in the world have to deal with the big C. And so this guy is essentially, I'll show you what he looks like here. This is him at a later age, but he was the kind of guy that he was willing to, when he graduated, he was in his early 20s, and he'd been given an honorary doctorate from the University of Heidelberg, because he was so, he'd spent so much time on a microscope cataloging parasites and microorganisms that he was really unique in the world. He was probably the most qualified microbiologist in the world at the time. And, and when he came to the States, back to the States from Germany, there was not really any jobs for microbiologists, right? So what did he do? He wasn't lazy and collected unemployment. He actually went to work with a guy called Timkins, who had a company called the Timkins Bearing Company. It was in a chapter of America. It was one of the largest bearing companies that existed. And Timken had heard about how Rife was actually a pretty good machinist, and so he invited him to come. And Timken was into boat racing. Okay, this is how things work, right? He invites Rife to come and build him, to machine a motor, to create a motor from nothing, just to build a motor for his boat, because he was into 100-mile racing on the open sea. So what you're looking at here in this picture is the boat they called Mrs. America, and the engine's name was Kitty Hawk V. And in that boat, you see on the top right, that's him, that's Rife. He actually built a motor in 1915, get this, with 2,700 horses.
Holy moly. And I'm into, I used to be very much into boat racing, and I was out in the water a lot. And that's even, it was hard to maintain an engine at 2,200, or two engines usually, or three at that horsepower. So it's impressive. I had no idea.
Right. And his boat ran a sustained 87 miles an hour for 100 miles.
That's incredible, even for today's standards.
He set the record for the fastest boat that lasted over 60 years. It's a 60-year record that he set with this thing. Imagine setting a world record that lasts for 60 years, right? It's
especially from 1915 to 1975.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine. We were on the moon at that time. That's the
yeah, we were there at that time. Yeah,
we did all these things, but they still couldn't go for faster than 87 miles per. Incredible.
No. Okay. So let's dig deeper in the story, and then I'll show you a little clip which summarizes essentially what this man really accomplished. Right. So what we have here this is him in his young years, but basically what he got famous for is, as a result of, and it's funny how life works this way. He was working as this guy's chauffeur, right? The bearing company's guy's chauffeur. He needed money, so he was willing to work as a chauffeur. And he would, while he was chauffeuring him around, he would tell him about microbiology and about germs and disease and stuff. And so this guy's sister, she got sick. So he asked him to figure out what the problem was. And he still had a couple of microscopes lying around. He went through her fridge, rampaged everything she was eating, and he figured out what was wrong, and he cured her from dying. And as a result, he invested in a laboratory. So this guy began building things to, further his studies, and the microscopes weren't very powerful. So he basically had to figure out a way to make a more and more powerful microscope. It got to the point where he invented a machine that, in conjunction with his microscope, would allow him to view things, germs and bacteria and microorganisms in real time, live. Not like today we have electron microscopes that destroy everything. No, in real time, he was able to watch them. And he came up with this crazy idea that everything has a resonant energy. And if you match the resonance of a particular energy, you can actually destroy the thing through, like the way an opera singer can wreck a crystal glass. Right. And he got so well known that in 1931, there was a big dinner where 44 of the most prominent doctors, scientists, and, professional healthcare people held an honorary dinner in his honor. And it was called The End to All Disease. This is the picture from that event. Okay. The end to all disease. This is how confident they were and how far he got his technology. And he did it in only about 5 years of working on it. Okay. So now you're probably wondering, well, what is it like? How does it work? Right. So we're going to look at that. I've got a little clip I cut together.
The universal microscope, developed in 1933, consists of 5,682 parts and is so called because of its adaptability in all fields of microscopical work, being fully equipped with separate substage condenser units for transmitted and monochromatic beam, dark field, polarized, and slit ultra illumination, including also a special device for crystallography. The entire optical system of lenses and prisms, as well as the illuminating units, are made of block crystal quartz, quartz being especially transparent to ultraviolet radiations. A monochromatic beam of light, corresponding exactly to the frequency of the organism, is then sent up through the specimen and the direct transmitted light, thus enabling the observer to view the organism stained in its true chemical color and revealing its own individual structure in a field which is brilliant with light. The rays of light refracted by the specimen enter the objective and are then carried up the tube in parallel rays through the 21 light bends to the ocular, a tolerance of less than one wavelength of visible light only being permitted in the core beam. Under the universal microscope, disease organisms such as those of tuberculosis, cancer, sarcoma, streptococcus, typhoid, staphylococcus, leprosy, hoof and mouth disease, and others may be observed to succumb when exposed to certain lethal frequencies, coordinated with the particular frequencies peculiar to each individual organism, and directed upon them by the rays covering a wide range of waves. Now directly above Rife's head is the ray tube, which will be turned on later to kill the virus. The black instrument to the left of Rife is the ray tube instrument and consists of a transmitter on which Rife could tune the frequencies which he knew would kill the virus, just like an opera singer's voice can shatter glass. Looking through the microscope, as he applied various frequencies, that he was able to kill these microorganisms, proving his theory to be correct. In order to determine which frequencies would kill a particular organism, it was absolutely essential that he be able to see the organisms in a living state so that he could observe the effect of various frequencies in real time. Rife later called the frequency which killed an organism its MOR, or mortal oscillatory rate.
Wild, right?
Well, not surprising at all to see this. I mean, it's a very the thought I had is a very masculine technology, because the thought that came up is we're all the women inventors, but incredible to see how advanced the thinking was, and how vibration and frequency were always part of their thinking for these inventors.
Exactly. And I think the only reason we haven't had more women inventors, and let's face it, the woman invented the computer. Okay, let's not forget that. With weaving machines, that whole technology is the basics foundation of all computer systems, all operating systems. And so, but I think we would have had more women inventors. But at that time, the way society was structured, it was usually the men who got to go to school, the men who got to go to university. Women were more considered to be needing to be the homemakers and whatnot, right? So, we're seeing a lot more women inventors now, you know, and I think so. It has nothing to do with the fact that women obviously can't invent, but
no.
the fact is, the good thing is that there is someone, a person, you know, we have masculine, feminine aspects in all of us anyway, that was tuning into the laws of nature out of his own instinctive creativity. He realized, you know, what to try out, and it was, you know, actually a very you know, what's amazing about really a lot of it is that he essentially did it as a hobby, like you mentioned before. It's like he never had like a contract to do it for any huge corporation or anything. This guy that, you know, whose sister he saved had so much money, he allowed him to set up a lab and just play around. And so he had the budget, he had a monthly stipend, he could keep working all day long and develop parts. And the actual final microscope he developed had over 8,500 parts, okay, that he personally, you know, crafted and built. You saw that thing, right? I mean, and the
inconceivable for me, to be honest.
Inconceivable, right? And what we've lost, you know, as a result, and we lost it as a result of, you know, it all ended with this prick, this guy called Morris Fishbein, who at the time was the sole stockholder of the AMA, the American Medical Association.
Here we go, Time Magazine again. I'm telling you, it's just
isn't it? There you go, Time Magazine. It's like almost Time Magazine is the stamp of he's one of ours, right? So what did this man do? I mean, when you think about what this man in his greed and disgustingness did, he was a journalist for the Journal of Medicine, which of course he was the owner of as well. And he had pressure on all doctors that had licenses all across America. And when he found out by fluke, eventually, of course, he was going to one day find out. But when he did find out about Rife, what did he do? He told Rife basically he's to turn over all of his technology and not even get paid a dime for it. And then he was going to take over it and put it out there. Right. Frank, and so what is Rife going to do?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Morris Fishbein actually, wasn't it rumored that he wasn't a real doctor, and that whole story was that he
flunked anatomy. He flunked anatomy. He never practiced medicine on one person. He never healed a single person. He didn't treat anybody. He had nothing going for him. But he was a good writer.
I remember that. And so he was the president of the American Medical Association.
He was the president of the American Medical Association, and he was basically the author, the sole, of course, chief editor of the Journal of Medicine. And, you know, so what's going to happen, right? You know what's going to happen. Essentially, what they did is they began to, when Rife turned them down, he found a weak link. This is what these people do. And the weak link at that time was that I think Rife had contracted an electrical engineer to help him build other versions of his ray tube device. And they set up a corporation. And this guy, you know, felt he should get more money or something, even though everyone had equal shares. And he got greedy, and so Fishbein found out that he was discontent, and he offered him a whopping amount of money and legal representation, and said, "We'll take Rife to court." And Rife didn't want to go to court. He thought the idea of going to court was absolutely disgusting, and he was nervous as heck. And he began drinking alcohol. And he's one of those people that, you know, there's some people they can't drink out; they shouldn't drink alcohol. And this was the beginning of the end of Rife. And like 20, 30 years later, Rife left this planet. And obviously, you know, Morris Fishbein sent goon squads to all the doctors, right? And essentially what happened is that, here, you know, I've got some of the facts here. Almost all of those 44 doctors, which I showed you in that picture before, that attended that banquet to honor Raymond Rife, were denying that they'd ever met him. Right? Allegations are that drug companies bent on stifling Rife's technologies waged war on him and won. Dr. Milbank Johnson, who held the banquet, the one whose house it was at, in his honor, was about to announce the results of the 1934 study of the 16 cancer patients who were reportedly cured. However, he never got to make that announcement. It is reported that just hours before making the announcement, he was fatally poisoned. And all of the papers mysteriously vanished. We never, of course, found out no one ever solved that crime. Morris Fishbein tried unsuccessfully to buy the rights of his machines, and soon afterwards, written records, stop-motion photographs, film, and other evidence of his works began disappearing. And basically, the universal microscope vanished. That thing, by the way, just to give you an idea of perspective, to build that microscope in parts today, back then it cost $250,000 to build that thing in 1931 dollars. Imagine how many millions that would cost now. This is how meticulous and how intense that material was, right? This guy just destroyed it, right? And essentially, they rubbed him out of medical journals. They went to all those doctors that were still working with, they had sold some of his microscope beam devices to various doctors, and they hit every one of those doctors up and said, you either stop using this material right now or we're going to take your license away. And so what do you think is going to happen?
It's absolutely incredible. And I actually encourage people to look into Morris Fishbein if they want to understand more about the medical history of the 20th century and why the things that are being pushed today, how that came to be. He was instrumental. And as you said, he was pure evil, a pure evil man. Of course, a tool, an instrument of a much greater group of people. But to go back to these inventions, Frank, as I said in the beginning, these are just the tip of the iceberg. You've picked some very impressive inventions from eras where nobody would have expected them to be around, and you show the sophistication even then of the thought and of the consciousness. What that shows us is that we are truly not on a just naturally evolving timeline. There's so many instances in history where you could see this genius consciousness shine through. And for all the Nikola Teslas and all the other inventors you presented us with today, there's hundreds, thousands of others that have contributed to the same kind of technology, positive, harmonious, beneficial, and usually accessible to everybody because that's what they wanted it to be. How do you see this, if you will, bridge timeline? Do you think we will see a chance in the following months and years that these technologies will make breakthrough appearances?
Well, I think that essentially this whole thing of the timeline war is the critical factor here, and that we have to become conscious and aware of the fact that we have some big decisions to make in our daily actions. Every one of us individually can affect, as we now know, the whole world, right? And we have to reach for the qualities that some of these people symbolize. And yes, like you say, there's so many others that have developed technology. Like, I'm absolutely convinced that if we manifest this new timeline, that, even those looking glass guardians were talking about this, even if it's a small percentage, it doesn't take a lot. It's the quality of energy that has an association with this new timeline energy. We have to embody that. We have to idolize that. We have to picture ourselves there. We have to feel it. We have to feel the emotion of being in that timeline. And most, I think, importantly also, is we have to not be afraid of calling out the fraud that we've been gaslit for the last 100 years, and just say, thank you very much. I've learned my lesson, and I now see that, we use that energy of deception instead of getting angry or instead of getting irritated, and we channel that energy to something creative. And we get involved creatively, each of us in our own little way. Everyone's got their own little soul mission. And I think it's important for us to realize that right now on the earth, we are at a very pivotal moment. And it's no accident that you have landed here right now at this exact time. Each of you listening, all of the people out there in the world, we've landed on the earth in this particular crux of a moment because we're apparently, we must have done something incredible to graduate to this level of game. Because the game has reached its absolute zenith right now. And I think everything is on the line here. So I do absolutely believe that these technologies will be our reward. And probably, as you say, it'll be the transition period where we will begin to, when we begin to manifest more and more of that timeline, a lot of those cabal, dark, deep state oriented technologies and ideologies will begin to wither and fade like the plant in the garden that dies when it doesn't get enough light, water, and nutrition. We have to stop giving the nutrition, light, and water to the ideas that are useless and we have to start feeding our energy toward the positive things. And then I believe that we will have that amazing new golden age. And it'll when I was thinking back on what the J-Rods left us as messages in terms of what they described as the quality of this new world, it's virgin territory. We don't even know, because it's so unique that we've never experienced it before. We've had civilizations that have come and gone, but we're back again in the same loop. We have to break that loop. I think that's what the Hunabku and that's what the Maya and that's what the Hopi are talking about. It's like we need to break that kind of cycle and move into that new territory. Absolutely. And I think then we'll have a wave of these technologies and it'll give us a boost. It'll make us feel happy. And imagine if the world, instead of being confronted by poverty, hunger, war, the threat of, freezing or not having any money, this whole idea of lack, if we took care of just getting rid of those things, I do believe that there will be just a period of kind of happiness and ease, like, coolness that will just sort of evolve. Like it doesn't even have to be that complicated. It's just we'll be at ease. We won't be all wound up and tight. We will be relaxed. And when we're relaxed, all kinds of magic is going to begin to happen. And that would be my wish for us for the new year.
Beautifully put. I second that. I echo that. So beautifully said, Frank. As always, eloquent, to the point, and infused with heart and love. And this is why I appreciate our conversation so much, why I appreciate you so much and what you bring to the table. And you said it beautifully. I think these are these amazing technologies that will probably astonish the world for a while, will be like training wheels over to the real thing. And I also see this happening just like you. It's, and it's come out through these conversations that we've had over this year. And one thing that has also come out, I think the initial looking glass topic has really triggered a lot over this year. It's also triggered you to create this amazing webinar called A Tale of Two Timelines. That's now been watched God knows how many times, and God knows how many messages we've received over it. It's something that we can't recommend enough, but give people who haven't seen it yet a quick overview. What can they expect in this webinar?
Okay, well, that webinar is essentially a breakdown of not just the messages of the Looking Glass Guardians, but also the history of, what is a looking glass, where did it come from? And it leads us into unbelievable and exciting and unexpected territory. It led me there because when I decided to mine down into that story and put together a comprehensive kind of report on what it's about, I didn't even realize all the different facets. CERN comes into play. Cataclysm science comes into play, consciousness comes into play in a big way, because the common denominator in all of it is that our consciousness has an impact on everything. And then, of course, the technology of transhumanism, all of the information about where we are, where we've come from, historical facts or falsehoods, we talk about them. It's all kind of embedded into 6 hours, like a 3-part deep dive into kind of the history of where we've landed with timelines and the idea of what is a timeline war, and most importantly, how can we free ourselves from being enslaved by a negative timeline?
Fantastic. A Tale of Two Timelines link is in the video description. As always, please check it out. Frank made it available in 3 parts, which, if it's a financial thing, that will make it easier. But of course, you can also purchase the whole thing and watch it. We just want to say so much work and intensity went into it. And this is a way you can support Frank's work. He's a filmmaker, a very, very accomplished one at that. And this is one of the avenues where he puts out all his knowledge, wisdom, and creative thought and energy. So thank you for that, Frank. And on a personal note, we almost never get to talk about this because there's so much information we want to convey. But it's a celebratory time. We got winter solstice, we got Christmas, and a new year. How will you spend this time? What will you do? And what's your vision into the new year?
Well, I'm going to. I know I've been invited to go to Athens, Greece, over the next few days. So I'm going to take a needed break from computer screens and internet and that kind of communication, and enjoy, the city of Athens, where, kind of a certain chapter of civilization happened. And it's amazing to be there and look at the ruins and to kind of immerse yourself in that chapter of human history, and maybe do a bit of shopping and being a bit of like, materialistic, Frank, maybe I should do a little bit of materialistic stuff. I probably need some new clothes and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to that. Oh, and I should also mention that I'm going to be in Los Angeles in February at the Conscious Life Expo. So, maybe we can put a link or something down below. So if people want to get tickets to come see me live, I'm going to be doing actually a mini workshop on the Tale of Two Timelines. And I'm doing a presentation about Looking Glass and all that as well. So those are kind of like and I've also been, that's another development just happened today or a couple of days ago. I did a talk live in front of about 120 people a couple of weeks ago. And the organizers of that, they want to kind of book a tour through Germany now. So I'm going to be trying that again. Hopefully I won't get canceled, but we're going to be doing, live person-to-person rooms in the mountains of Bavaria and other southern areas of Germany to try and spread the message out there, all the important things we need to know about. So those are kind of things that are mapping out for the early part of the new year. And of course, I hope that we do some more shows together and keep going, and maybe we can develop it.
I don't see our momentum slowing down anytime soon, Frank, just like yours. Also, we haven't really announced it bigly yet, but in April, Frank and I are actually going to be in the same place, Sedona, Arizona. We're going to be at a conference and speaking and hugging and sharing some time face to face, which I look very much forward to. Also, if you want to, we'll put the link in the description to that conference, and you can hopefully we'll see you there. We'd love that. But Frank, I want to thank you for an incredible year of conversations, consciousness expanding, because really it's not about the numbers, just reflect something, right? The 3.5 million, whatever people, that just reflects something that we're hitting a nerve, and it's not about our egos. It's about information, consciousness, energy, love coming out to the people, truth, authenticity, freedom. That's what we stand for. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you do and for your time invested this year.
Thank you too, John. Really, I appreciate you bringing me into your forum and into your space, and I'm so happy that the energy is just right, the chemistry is good, and it's all about getting the truth out there. That, like you say, it's the most important thing, and I think we sense the urgency of what's going on the planet, and I just feel every little thing that we can do to impress or inspire every single person, even if it's one person that gets inspired from what we're talking about, that alone can change the world. That'll change the timeline. That could be that one person that, a year down the road just does one particular thing which completely screws up the cabal's plans. You don't know, right? All these things are possible. So, and I think maybe made that possible to a certain degree. So I appreciate you too, and all the best to you in the holidays.
Thank you, Frank. Many blessings to you. Thank you, you and your loved ones. Merry Christmas. Inspired Tribe, thank you so much for tuning in, being with us on this amazing journey. There's also a playlist with all previous conversations with Frank in a video description, just in case you want to binge watch something over the holidays, you'll have something to do. All right, Tribe, thank you again. We love you. We appreciate you, and we'll be back with you again very, very soon. We're more dedicated than ever to provide authentic, truthful, and uncensored information and inspiration. That's why we created the Inspired community on the free speech platform Locals. There's no censorship, a free flow of information, and it's more personal and intimate. And you can join us as a free member or a paid supporter. Please visit inspired.locals.com and join us today.